truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
The Simple Truth, rising up to explore the difficult topics of real life. Join us as we proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful with the simple truth of Jesus Christ and His Holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Havens.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we proclaim the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of Saint Joseph. It is Throwdown Thursday, where we focus on themes of spiritual warfare and the real challenges that are before us, all to better understand the battles that we're in, to actively, effectively engage in fighting the good fight, to participate with the grace of God that is being lavished upon us, and to share in the victory of Christ now and for all eternity. Our guest today is Julia Maloney. She holds degrees from Yale and Harvard. She is author of St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church, newly published by TAN. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Julia Maloney, thank you for being with us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, great to have you with us. And to begin, can you share a bit of your personal backstory that led you to the writing of this book?
Yeah, around 2016, I just became really fascinated with this pontificate. This was around the time when Amoris Laetitia had come out, and there was that whole controversy about communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. I just began really investigating what was going on in this pontificate. And not too much after that, the book The Dictator Pope came out by Henry Cyr, and his first chapter was called The St. Gallen Mafia. And I read that chapter up to the point where they talked about the leader, Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini. And I was just so fascinated that I temporarily put the book down and downloaded something that Martini had written and just immersed myself in Martini's writings. And that was the first moment where it clicked for me that some of the confusing things that we were seeing in this pontificate, they had a backstory. And I just became completely fixated on trying to find that backstory and figure out who the St. Gallen Mafia members really were.
Well, it's a great book, very well written, very helpful, lays out the facts and makes clear that the St. Gallen Mafia is not a conspiracy theory to be dismissed. I like what Dr. Janet Smith said about the book, quote, "Our times abound in conspiracy theories. Here the conspirators themselves acknowledge the machinations and goals of the St. Gallen self-identified mafia that collaborated to have Bergoglio elected Pope to implement a plan to change the church," end of quote. But let's start even a bit further back with the founding of the St. Gallen Mafia. You write that the 5 cardinals who make up the group first got together in 1996 at the prompting of Cardinal Martini, specifically to form an opposition to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, future Pope Benedict XVI. At the time, he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith under Pope John Paul II. Why were these 5 cardinals so set against Ratzinger in 1996?
I think they really saw him as the flag bearer for the conservative restoration movement. He was the most prominent name in that direction, and he had fought against some of their different proposals. We talked about communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, and he had shut down that proposal in 1994 through the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, when 2 of the members, Carl Lehman and Walter Casper, had proposed it in 1993. So He was certainly the glue for the group in terms of the man that they were opposing, the program that they were opposing, and the biography of one of the members, Cardinal Godfrey Daniels, talks about how they had other things that they would talk about as well. So they would talk about homosexuality, especially around after the year 2000. They talked about decentralizing the church. They talked about women deaconesses at various points. They talked about the ordination of married men. So a lot of the agenda that is currently on the progressive side of the church, it was really discussed years before by this group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you provide many, many facts in the book showing how off the rails these five cardinals were in many issues of faith and morals. And truly, that's what they had in common. It was their infidelity to Jesus and his Catholic Church in matters of faith and morals. For instance, they were all dissenters against Humanae Vitae. We can call them modernists, progressives, global leftists. They all fit. And these cardinals came together in their so-called mafia to wage war on Ratzinger, but ultimately it was to wage war on Jesus and his Catholic Church. For me, that's one of the strongest takeaways in the book, that we need to get fortified in the authoritative teachings of Jesus and his Catholic Church on faith and morals, and be on guard, especially for those prelates within the church who are wrongly working to try to water down and change those authoritative teachings. We must be aware and clear-eyed on the fact that the dictatorship of relativism has infiltrated much of the human leadership of the church. And this is also what we need to teach our children. We need to guard them from the wolves as they grow up and teach them how to be on guard and detect those wolves for themselves and for their children. Pope Benedict tells it to us himself this way in his 2020 book, which you quote in your book, written with Cardinal Sarah. Pope Benedict says this, quote, "On every side, the waves of relativism are submerging the bark of the church," end of quote. You weave this thread throughout your book, the dictatorship of relativism. It's what Ratzinger was against, and really what this mafia embraced. Anything more on that thread of the dictatorship of relativism?
Yeah, it's a huge theme. Of course, Ratzinger, he gave that famous speech about the dictatorship of relativism shortly before he was elected in 2005. It was at that pre-conclave mass that he gave this speech, and it was just such an eloquent battle cry, such an eloquent center of gravity for us to focus on. And I think that his pontificate, you see him in various ways, of course, trying to fight the dictatorship of relativism and having this group of modernists warring against him. The first half of my book is actually called War, precisely to talk about this war that was against Pope Benedict. And it actually, for those who haven't read the book, it comes from, there was a member named Achilles Silvestrini, and someone ran into him the night that Pope Benedict was elected. And this cardinal who ran into him said that Silvestrini looked defeated, and he looked like he was declaring a form of war against Pope Benedict. So they really, as the book details, they really made life very hard for Pope Benedict, just with the dissent. Martini, who I talked about before, he had some very high level moments of dissent where Benedict would say something and then he would undercut it almost immediately afterwards. So I think that this is a struggle that was all too real, and it's a struggle that we we have to take sides, and we have to do our efforts in our own vocation, to try to fight the dictatorship of relativism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're speaking today with Julia Maloney, author of The St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church. Real quick, since we only have about a minute or two, I think, until the break, what else do you want to share with us from that opening section on war that really jumps out to you as maybe a story or a detail that can help make it all more clear to us?
Yeah, I think there was a kind of multi-pronged war against him, and each mafia member had kind of a front that he was in charge of. So Cardinal Daniels was attacking Humanae Vitae. Martini wanted a new council, kind of like a Vatican III. Casper wanted more local control for churches, communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. So it was a very complicated, multi-pronged war. I think that's important to remember.
Good and helpful. And when we come back, there is so much to get to in this book. We're going to try to get to as much as we possibly can today, but there is no substitute to actually getting this book and reading it for yourself. It's newly published by TAN. Again, the St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church. You can get it at tanbooks.com, tanbooks.com, or wherever you find books, you can find it. But this is one that you need to really have and go through the history. It is so well written. It is riveting. It will keep your attention. I highly recommend this book. Again, the St. Gallen Mafia, tanbooks.com. Go get it during the break, but we're going to be right back with Julia Maloney. Stay tuned.
This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your daily host for the Catholic Current. Join us at 5 p.m. Eastern for our special Friday format. We'll begin with Let's Talk About This. Who needs Catholics? Believe it or not, Catholics do have a future. Then we'll move on to Weekend Readiness, reviewing the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday scriptures, so you'll be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. That's the Catholic Current on Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Prayer in time of affliction. Blessed, O Lord, be thy name forever. Who has permitted this affliction to come upon us? We cannot escape it, but must of necessity fly to thee to help us and turn it to our good. Lord, we are now in affliction. Our souls are ill at ease, for we are much troubled with this present suffering. Let it please thee, O Lord, to deliver us, for poor wretches that we are. What can we do without thee? Thy mighty hand can do all things. Give us patience, O Lord, and strength and peace. Help us, O God, and we will not fear, no matter how grievously we may be afflicted. O Lord, thy will be done. Welcome be the will of God. Sacred Heart of Jesus, we place our trust in thee. Amen.
Hello, this is Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. In 1948, the UN published the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, stating that, quote, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. And it also states, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Isn't it time for nations to pay attention to these statements when they craft their policies on abortion? This is Father Frank Pavone, National Director of Priests for Life.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today on this Throwdown Thursday, Julia Maloney. She is author of The St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church, published by TAN. You can get it at tanbooks.com. And talking about really the war of these five cardinals who considered themselves in this group, the St. Gallen Mafia, as they called themselves, this mafia. And so, they had this war against Ratzinger. We talked about that in the first segment some. I want to dive into that a bit more. In the 2005 Conclave, these cardinals opposed Ratzinger, but then when it became clear that the votes were swinging his way and his election was inevitable, then it seems that they immediately befriended him and tried to influence him, while at the same time, behind his back, they continued to carry out their war with him, war against him, with various attacks. And with this, they had this goal. It seems, to get him out as soon as possible and prevent him from accomplishing as little as possible. You spoke about this a little bit in the first segment. What more can you tell us about this, specifically this tactic that they seemed to try to change course with during the conclave, when it seemed like things were turning where he was going to be inevitable, and then they tried to befriend him?
Yeah, I think the theory behind this seems to be that Ratzinger, the conclave dynamics, basically, he had crossed a certain threshold where if his supporters held out and didn't blink, basically there would be no blocking him. There would be no compromise candidate. But there was this notion that Ratzinger probably, he didn't really want to be Pope, as far as we can tell. So there was this concern that maybe if this game went on too long, he would just bow out and he would try to perhaps make, he would want Cardinal Camillo Ruini to be Pope. So the theory is that essentially Martini, the leader of the St. Gallen Mafia, did not want Ruini to be Pope and thought that Ratzinger would be kind of friendlier to him. And so I've looked at so many different sources that say that he gave the green light for Ratzinger to win, and Ratzinger, he won. It was one of the fastest elections of modern papal history. So I think that we're on pretty solid ground on that sort of theory of what happened, as far as I can tell. But he had this cryptic saying where he said to expect beautiful surprises from Ratzinger. And it's so kind of eerie. I mean, what did he know? What sort of surprises were we to expect from Ratzinger? Did he know that maybe was Ratzinger already thinking about stepping down at some point independently? And did he know could he sense that? We don't know for sure. That's one possibility. That's something that has crossed different people's minds. But in any case, they wanted him to be a transitional pope, and they were starting this war against him. And I think they knew that he had a potential Achilles heel, which is the fact that he had been speaking for multiple years about how sometimes it is right for a pope to resign, and he had of course seen what happened with John Paul II and his slow decline from Parkinson's disease. So I think that they knew how to make life very, very difficult for him.
So everything was calculation. That's interesting. So it wasn't necessarily that that Ratzinger was inevitable within the conclave, but it seemed more like Martini was just saying, look, if it's going to be between these two guys, let's go with Ratzinger. So that's really what it was. Interesting. Okay. So also in reading the book, there were times where Pope John Paul II or Pope Benedict XVI, they seemed to catch on to some of these cardinals, and they took proper action against them, sometimes very firmly. But it also seems that they both made some big mistakes in letting some of these guys hang around and have great influence. For example, Cardinal Silvestrini, he was one of the last people to see John Paul II before he died, as you relate in your book. And then just 3 days after he died, Silvestrini was inviting Martini and the Mafia to get together for their anti-Ratzinger plotting session. And then Martini is with Benedict in June 2021, looking him in the eye and telling him, "You have no choice but to leave. The time is now," meaning for resignation. These men were able to hang around when they ought to have been exiled for the poison that they were pushing. And it seemed that they had some great influence because of that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an enigma. I think that with hindsight, we can look back and see that there were a lot of very bad appointments that were made under some of these popes, and it's very hard to know how much were they in the dark about what was really going on, how much did they let the wolves? I mean, Benedict had that statement about not wanting to flee for fear of the wolves. Pray for me, and yet, he let Martini meet with him so often. That was kind of one of the surprising parts of researching this book, seeing the meetings that Martini was having with Ratzinger, and he was boasting about it to a confidant that he was having these private meetings with Benedict. And then he was saying things like, "I hope that Benedict resigns soon," as if he knew something, as if maybe Benedict was already talking about resigning and talking about it, perhaps, to Martini as well. And then, as you said, Martini did tell Benedict to resign in 2012 in June. So it's, I don't know, as a writer, I sort of practice a kind of restraint on this, where I report as many facts and put as many pieces of the puzzle together as I can, but I kind of let the reader deduce or ask questions about, what may have been going on here. Or, I think we need further research into this. And I think just recently, 1 Peter 5, where I often write for, they published something by the great historian Roberto de Mattei, and he's been shedding light on Silvestrini in particular, and a sort of gang that was operating in the Vatican, so to speak, before the St. Gallen Mafia. And I think that may go a long way toward explaining some of these confusing elevations that we see here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, your work, Professor de Mattei's work, he's been on the show a couple times, and we really appreciate what he's doing. But your work is so important because it is bringing this to the light, whereas we can look back and things are a lot easier to see looking back once we have the facts assembled for us. But Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, obviously they were in the dark on quite a bit. They were deceived in various areas. They had these wolves all around them. And so, looking back on it, you can see what happens when you're not able to detect those wolves. Very bad things can take place. And so all the more reason for us to make sure this stuff is getting to the light and everybody can see it. And you do a great job laying it out. But they even tried to mount public pressure to get Pope John Paul II out, didn't they? So that they could elect Martini as Pope. There are facts that lead us into that direction as well, aren't there?
Yeah. Around the year 2000, they had this interesting kind of series of trial balloons where they would talk about in the media. Several cardinals from the St. Gallen Mafia would talk about how Pope John Paul II was allegedly planning to resign in the year 2000. And he had allegedly tried to make it to the year 2000, but then he was going to be ready to abdicate. And they were trial balloons, so they were supposed to effect what they floated, what they raised. They were trying to accomplish the very idea that they were floating, and they didn't work. But it just it's very eerie because when you look at that pattern that they were trying this in the year 2000 already with John Paul II, and then you think about what ultimately happened with Benedict resigning. It raises many questions, and some of it we just don't know the answers. We can only speculate, but at least we can kind of pose the question that they seem to have been very, very fixated on papal succession. And at first, as you said, they wanted Martini. He was the one, and then he got sick with Parkinson's disease. So eventually they realized that it wouldn't be Martini that they would get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the book, as far as being most helpful in really understanding the history and the common thread here that goes from all the way back to Jesuit priest Father Karl Rahner. I would say this is a line of infidelity that you connect from Karl Rahner through Martini to Bergoglio. What do you see as that common thread? I know Professor De Mattei, he did describe this as Pope Francis is the true revolutionary, even truer than Rahner, because Rahner was a dreamer and a thinker, and Bergoglio actually does things. But how do you explain this thread for us so that we can see it clearly?
So Rahner, after the Second Vatican Council, he wrote this book called The Shape of the Church to Come. And the idea was basically how do we shape the post-conciliar church? And the ideas that he came up with, they're going to sound very familiar, are things like communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, ordination of married men, synodality, etc. So essentially it gets passed on to Martini and then to Bergoglio, and Bergoglio is kind of the one to implement what Rahner had dreamed of.
Yeah, when we get back, we're going to get into that some more. What is the dream, the playbook, the goals that are culminating in Francis's pontificate? What about the conclave, the election of Pope Francis? What about that? We'll get into that some, as well as some of the tactics and maneuvers, which when they're exposed are extremely helpful to see, because these things are still at play and we need to understand them. So much more to get to on the St. Gallen Mafia with Julia Maloney. But make sure you get a copy of this book, tanbooks.com. We'll be right back.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live. Mother Miriam is a Catholic nun whose humor, holiness, and years of theological training bless all who are in need of encouragement and practical advice.
Hello, beloved. This is Mother Miriam, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Mother Miriam Live. As always, you're going to be able to call, text, or email whatever your questions are. Through a partnership between the Station of the Cross and LifeSite News, you will be able to listen and watch Mother Miriam Live on Facebook at the Station of the Cross, including past episodes on podcast. God bless you.
Listen on your local Station of the Cross affiliate and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app, or watch the Mother Miriam Live video stream on Facebook by searching the Station of the Cross. That's Mother Miriam Live each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
At 8 weeks and 2 days after conception, the embryo is becoming more physically active during this time. Motions may be slow or rapid, single or repetitive, spontaneous or reflexive. Head rotation, neck extension, and hand-to-face contact occur more often. Human life is sacred. Think about it. coalitionforlife.com.
The Station of the Cross appreciates the generosity of our supporters. We are committed to keeping our donors' accounts up to date. If there have been changes made to your payment information, please call us so that we can update your account. 1-877-888-6279, extension 104, or update your information online at thestationofthecross.com. Thank you for your generous support of Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Julia Maloney. She holds degrees from Yale and Harvard. She is author of The St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church, newly published by TAN. You can get it at tanbooks.com. Julia, what is the dream, the playbook, the goals that are now culminating in Pope Francis's pontificate?
That's such an important question. And in 1999, Martini he got up at a synod and he said that he had a dream. And he was alluding to one of his friends who was also a one-time mafia member, Basil Hume. And Hume had spoken in 1980 about having a dream. And now Martini was saying that he had a dream, and it was to address a bunch of different knots, KNOTS, that were doctrinal and disciplinary. And he spoke kind of in code, but looking back on it, we go back to basically he was speaking of communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, ordination of married men, ordination of deaconesses, new approach to sexuality. These were the dreams. It wasn't just one issue, it was a series of issues. And he kept coming back to it. He had an interview with Eugenio Scalfari, a famous atheist, from La Repubblica newspaper in Italy. And essentially he told Scalfari asked him, what are the most important issues in order? And Martini, this is around 2008 or 2009, he says the divorced is the number one issue. And the number two issue is the appointment of bishops. And the number three issue is priestly celibacy. So when we hear the dream articulated in this way, another way of putting the dream is synodality, the idea of using synods, a series of synods to revolutionize the church, essentially. And instead of having a big council, because Martini, he had wanted a council, but a kind of Vatican III. And at some point he realized, probably with input from other St. Gallen Mafia members, that wasn't very viable and that it would be better and more practical to use synods as a vehicle for change. And so, of course, this is going to sound very familiar in the pontificate of Pope Francis, because we did have the very contentious family synods that were discussing the Casper proposal, named after Walter Casper of the Mafia, for communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. So Martini said he wanted something on the divorce. That was his number one dream, a synod on the divorced. And he got it in this pontificate. That was one of the very first things that happened in this pontificate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, based on all of that, what do you think we ought to be looking for in terms of upcoming moves that perhaps Pope Francis would make based on this dream, this plan, this playbook that has been kind of handed on to him in a sense?
So definitely, we'll be watching the Synod on Synodality coming up. It's really, I think it remains to be seen what exactly, if they have a specific agenda besides just reinforcing synodality and making this kind of a permanent revolutionary process. Some people have said maybe they'll try to do deaconesses in the synod on synodality. I'm not quite sure yet, but we'll be watching that. The second thing to watch is, of course, what's going to happen with the moves against the traditional Latin Mass. Traditionis Custodes, the motu proprio against the Latin Mass that abrogated Summorum Pontificum, which Benedict XVI had promulgated to liberalize the use of the Latin Mass. Traditionis Custodes came out literally probably 2 weeks after I finished editing my book. So there's nothing specifically in the book about the traditional Latin Mass, but after the book was just getting in the process of being published, I did write some articles at 1 Peter 5 about Traditionis Custodes and about how the Mafia, they even had their hands in this issue of the Latin Mass. So I talked about how one of the members, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, some of the things that he did, and one of his proteges is Arthur Roche, who is a new leader for the Congregation for the Doctrine of Worship under Pope Francis. So he was specifically picked by Pope Francis, and he has this history with Murphy O'Connor fighting against Summorum Pontificum. Basically, the two of them were misrepresenting Summorum Pontificum when it came out and trying to limit its ability to let people participate in the traditional Latin Mass. So I think that these new developments, the synodality development and then the Traditionis Custodes development, they're very, very worrisome and definitely something that we're going to have to keep our eyes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important for people to understand these facts, these connections. Again, you can find that good work, those articles at 1peter5.com. Specifically recommend here the one I'm looking at from August of 2021, the St. Gallen Mafia and the Latin Mass, and then one from just a few days ago, November 29th, 6 takeaways from Pope Francis's war on the Latin Mass. Maybe we'll get to talk about that a little bit more as we go, but for now, I want to bring it back to what you call in the book a revolutionary process culminating in Francis's pontificate, and McCarrick even emerges in here as he's enlisted to talk up Bergoglio just ahead of the 2013 pre-conclave meetings. These cardinals pushed for Bergoglio, there's no doubt about it. As the reader learns more and more details in the book about that push, it does beg the question as to whether it's all permissible, yet you make that clear on page 105 that none of it would invalidate Pope Francis's election. But at the same time, according to the words of Mafia member Murphy O'Connor, who said, quote, "I think that when the cardinals elected Bergoglio, they did not know what a Pandora's box they were opening. They did not know that he was a Jesuit in very deep ways. They did not know who they were electing," end of quote. Your thought on, as you look at the details of the way that he was pushed, again, you're not making the case in any way that this invalidates his pontificate, but what do you walk away with from it all?
I think that one piece of the puzzle I would add here is just the level of activity that was happening in 2012 is really staggering, coming from this group, because in 2012 the Martini and Daniels and some other Mafia members, they actually met in April of 2012 at or near St. Gallen, Switzerland. And this is 6 years after Daniel's biographers said they stopped meeting. So for years, we have been told that this group broke up around 2006, that we didn't hear a peep from them, at any point afterwards. And then we hear that they were meeting in April 2012. And there's actually a new book. And my understanding is it has a testimony from someone who was at that meeting and who was friends with Martini, just verifying again that Martini really was there in 2012. So I think that around 2012, Casper was also talking about a southerly wind. This is something that my colleague Micah Hickson pointed out to me, and this was later used to talk about Bergoglio. So if they had their eye on Bergoglio in 2012 and everything, there was so much calculation going on here. As you said, as I say in my book, I've looked at this from different angles, and the canon lawyers who seem most reputable on this issue have suggested that this does not invalidate the election. So my position in the book is not in any way challenging the validity of Pope Francis's election. But for the historical record, I think it's important for us to see how much calculation went into getting him elected. And then, as you said with Murphy O'Connor, the idea was that he opened a Pandora's box that no one was able to foresee. And I think that that is very self-explanatory. That is exactly what has happened.
You expose a vast number of their tactics and maneuvers, which is extremely helpful as these moves are still in play, and we must understand them more fully and see them more clearly so as to immediately notice them when they come our way, as they will. This is one of the things that I noticed. They don't go for a full frontal attack against the church's teachings. They work slowly within the church, trying to initiate processes, letting the leash out gently, and remove obedience to the teaching in practice first. Here's an example that kind of hits on all of that. It's a joke that Bergoglio made at one point. It says here, in one interview, Bergoglio even casually made a celibacy joke to illustrate a point about being moderately optimistic about Argentina's future. He told the story of two priests discussing a future council. One asks the other, will a new council abolish compulsory celibacy? The other replies, it would seem so. And the first one says, oh, well, we won't see it, but our children will. So you get in that joke there a lot about the fact that, okay, this is going to be slowly, we're going to do this, but also that we're already doing it in practice, right? That they're going to have children, their children are going to see it, right? So I don't know, something about that joke I think just really caught my attention, and I was like, well, first of all, it's such in bad taste to even make such a joke, but there's a lot that seems to be packed in there. What more can you tell us about some of those maneuvers?
Yeah, I think the key word that you bring up here is in practice, practice or praxis. This is another point that Roberto de Mattei really stresses, that the real revolutionaries, in the vein of something Marx said, they're going to have to be men of praxis and practice. And so I think that captures what Bergoglio was already kind of doing in Argentina, kind of leading a more kind of liberal church in practice, especially letting people come up for communion, even if they would not be eligible under Canon 915. So yeah, I think that would be what I would stress there.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, so in practice, we can see this, I think, with the example of contraception, right? Just let it go, right? Don't say anything about it. Just allow the practice to continue and never say anything about it. And that is a way of, the doctrine has not changed, but the practice certainly has. So we need to proclaim the truth on that and get people back to living the faith there. We're going to be back with Julia Maloney, the St. Gallen Mafia. Get the book, tanbooks.com. But we'll be right back with more in a final segment. Stay tuned.
Here at the Station of the Cross, we proudly bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners through radio and mobile devices, and we're grateful for the feedback we've received.
I grew up Catholic Church, haven't been in the Catholic Church for decades, but I'm in the process of working my way back for the simple reason that I needed a place to listen to pro-life, pro-family messages. Catholic radio is it. It's a place to hear that message without all the political bias and all that that's going on News Talk Radio.
It changed my life.
It's the only station I turn on.
The Catholic station is an answer to prayer.
It just couldn't be more fulfilling.
It's helped me learn more about the faith, and it's helped me to deepen my faith as a result of that.
It's on continuously in my house, day and night. You can't imagine how much I receive from that channel.
If you've been blessed by listening to the Station of the Cross, let us know. Call 1-877-888-6279, extension 112. Then share your testimonial with us.
Are you ready to take on the world of flesh and the devil with just the facts? This is Jesse Romero, host of Jesus 911, heard weekdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm joined each day by a variety of co-hosts like Ruben Nava, Paul Clay, Dan Schneider, and my amazing wife, Anita Romero. We tackle Catholic devotions, spiritual warfare, family life, saving America, and everything in between. Join us each weekday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific for Jesus 911. God bless you. Keep the faith.
Praise be to Jesus. Hi, this is Joe McClain, host of the Catholic Drive Time Morning Show, joining you on the Station of the Cross each weekday morning at 7 a.m. We'll keep you informed and inspired with insightful guests and breaking news stories of the day. That's the Catholic Drive Time, weekday morning, 7 a.m. on the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic radio app. We'll see you then. May God love you.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Julia Maloney, and her book, The St. Gallen Mafia, Exposing the Secret Reformist Group Within the Church. Final segment here, and by the way, tanbooks.com is the place to get it, or anywhere where you get books. Highly recommend this book as one that you must get, The St. Gallen Mafia. This is a history that you must understand and know, and this is something of a reference book to continue to come back to and learn more and more, because there is so much in here, and it is a riveting read as well. Again, tanbooks.com. But still on this topic of sort of the maneuvers and the tactics that are being exposed here, one more thing I want to get to, because I think this is so important for people to understand, and that is when they talk about balance or taking the middle way, right? They don't mean this in the appropriate way that you would use these words. This is not about temperance or about virtue. This is not about being correct. This is about using a form of compromise to gain ground, to keep things ambiguous, something for both sides, and then you can keep pushing your agenda in the shadows. As long as it hasn't been explicitly rejected, it's still kind of there, right? So you can keep it going, and then you can be patient for a long time and keep working in the shadows in practice, and then hopefully at some point you can change the doctrine. So this is how they're looking at things. And even you write in here about how Casper and Daniels, they were tasked with preparing the synod's text for the 1985 synod on the 20-year legacy of Vatican II. So again, they're hanging around there putting together that text. But it says that Casper explained his goal was to emphasize balance without joining into the widespread lamentation at the time that Ratzinger had just put out the Ratzinger report and was giving some critique on the Second Vatican Council, rightly so. But it says here that Casper and Daniels delivered a final synodal document that was, like certain key works of Vatican II, a compromise text, giving each side something to grasp. Again, then they can sort of work patiently in the background. I'm going to throw one more example on that before I get your comments, and this is the example about homosexuality. It says around the year 2000, the Mafia decided to prioritize the topic of homosexuality. So a decade later, in 2010, Bergoglio encouraged his fellow Argentine bishops to support legislation for same-sex civil unions, directly flouting Ratzinger's 2003 instruction to offer emphatic opposition to legal recognition of homosexual unions of any kind. And then a decade after that, 2020, Pope Francis said, referencing same-sex couples, what we have to create is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. I stood up for that, he said. And with that, you say, you saw the hand sweep across the chessboard, heard a sound at the mantelpiece, and understood why the revolutionaries traveled in patience, and referencing there the beginning of that chapter about Chekhov's gun. But this idea that they are willing to be patient and work in the shadows and work in the ambiguity as long as nobody stands up against them and really puts them in their place, so to speak. What are your thoughts on it, and what is most important for us to take away here?
For me, this is just classic modernism. This is what Pope St. Pius X talks about in Pascendi, about the different wiles that they have. I think it's important to note they don't want to leave the church. They don't want even to cause a schism in the church, as far as I can tell. According to their best theorists, they want to stay in the church and they want to weaponize time in such a way that they completely take over the institution. And this is something we've seen. Just think about the educational system or the media. Think about the way that cultural Marxism has completely taken over those areas, to where, almost any college, except for just a few, is going to have a reputation for having very wacky leftist ideas, right? Well, they did that over a period of many decades, and they did it through infiltration of the institution. And it's the same thing here, where a lot of the cultural Marxist forces, they wanted to do something similar with the Catholic Church. So wherever the motivation is coming from for these people, they're using the same playbook as the cultural Marxists by weaponizing time and patience and infiltration. And as you said, that kind of devastating form of ambiguity, and devastating forms of practice, to where you don't have to have the doctrine change yet, because if no one is living the doctrine, it's a dead letter. I'm fascinated by how the revolutionaries work, and to me, just kind of trying to get into their minds and trying to understand where they're going has been very fruitful for just kind of understanding. When they appear to drop something that they have been working for many years, you have to understand that they're not dropping it. It's just going underground, or it's having a period of latency, and it's going to come back. So those are some important things to know with that.
Mm-hmm. Very helpful. Thank you for all of that. And your most recent article at 1peter5.com, 6 takeaways from Pope Francis's war on the Latin Mass, from just a few days ago. And you're reviewing Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's new book, in this article as well. But you make one point in here. You're referring to one contributor's writings, and he's writing about how the stage is possibly being set here for basically, it seems to be saying, and this is an idea that I've been thinking about as well, if they try to suppress the Latin Mass, which they are trying to do, and even increase that suppression, are they trying to drive all of the people who now have found this reverence in the Latin Mass, found the beauty and the ability to love our Lord even more fruitfully in the Latin Mass, and they're going to try to drive all these people, if they can't find the Latin Mass anymore, except for the Society of St. Pius X, will they drive people in that direction? Are they trying to drive people in that direction? And while people debate whether they're in schism or not, it doesn't seem to me that we can say for sure that they would be. I'm kind of not sure about all of that. I'm not sure enough to say I would, for the sake of my own soul, not necessarily be comfortable and go in that direction. So I don't think I would do that, but I could understand the temptation to go that way. And if people did, then for perhaps Pope Francis to come down hard and say, no, now you are in schism, now that you're over there, now I'm going to be clear on this, and you're separated, or in some way do some sort of move in that direction. What is your thought about that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I actually, when I saw that passage, I put it on Twitter and asked people to discuss the passage, and they had a lot of interesting ideas. And one of the prominent users on Twitter, prominent Catholic account, said that this was, an early theory that people had, and that it looks kind of more likely as each day passes that maybe there is this kind of move to corral people and to kind of cut them off. So I don't know. Let's definitely pray that maybe we're wrong, and pray that maybe there's some hope still.
Sure. Yes. And keep praying for the conversion of Pope Francis, praying for all the bishops, priests, religious, all husbands, fathers, wives, and mothers, marriages, all families, the entire church, the entire world. We need to keep praying. We've got First Friday coming up, First Saturday coming up, a lot of opportunities to dive into the graces of God and get this book, the St. Gallen Mafia, tanbooks.com. Julia Maloney, thank you so much for your good work and for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Hardwood Mall.